class. Maybe kind of read through those so you know sort of what you're going to be looking for. And at the end, if you feel like you would like more information from one of those, feel free to ask. So this is AP Environmental Science. How many of you are juniors? How many of you are seniors? All right. Grab the dwarfs.
I just Vegas. Do you want pencil? Yeah.
Just take roll or anything else?
I'll take care of it.
Okay.
Okay.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Eileen Horn. I'm a state representative, but I'm newly elected, so not a professional politician yet, and hopefully I won't be. So I'm really excited to be talking to you guys. I have a master's degree in environmental science. I studied biology in undergrad. I took AP Environmental Science when I was in high school, and we need a lot of people like us in government. So I'm basically here to recruit you. So I thought I would just talk about my job a little bit, and I would love to get questions from you all about environmental policies you're interested in, about the way that government interacts with the natural world, with the environment, challenges that we're facing. I'm sure you all have talked about many environmental challenges that we're facing, and I can try to clue you in terms of what the role of the state is in that and what the role of government is. I don't have great news for you in terms of our state government isn't very progressive, but again, recruiting you all. So, okay, so I represent the 10th district. That is Southeast Lawrence, down to Baldwin City, and just south of Eudora. And if any of you have phones or tablets, you can actually look up who your representative is. Do enough people have a device handy that they could do that? Okay, let's do it. It's the top website, which is ksledgelookup.org. If you navigate there, it's a website that helps you figure out who your legislator is. So you'll input your address, and then it'll tell you who your state representative and who your state senators are. Tell me if you have a hard time getting to it. It should be pretty easy, hopefully. So there's like a blue field at the top where you enter your address. Does anybody need more time? Okay, so how many people have Marcy Francisco as their state senator? You see that name on there? So if you scroll down to your senator. Okay, who has maybe Jim Carlskin? Or no, Tom Holland? Some Tom Hollands? Okay. Anybody else have a different state senator?
Anthony Hensley?
Oh, okay, so you live close to Topeka?
I live in the middle of nowhere.
Okay, all right, okay, and who do you have? Oh, I'm your state rep. Below that is your state senator. Do you see that one? Who do you have for your senator? Tom Holland. Okay. So first state rep, how many have Boog Heiberger? Anybody? Dennis Boog Heiberger. Okay. Barbara Ballard. A couple Barbaras. Who has me? Eileen. Yes. I brought candy for all of you or something. Anybody have Jim Carlskin? Mike Amix. Ooh, a couple Amixes. Okay. Anybody have somebody different? Okay. Excellent. So on that webpage is how to contact both your senator and your representative. And what this means, right, is we work for you. I represent 25,000 people in the 10th district. The senators have districts of about 75,000, and we need to hear from our constituents all the time about what matters to you and what's important to you. So that's the contact information for the two people that represent you. You can contact any senator or representative, but sometimes it means more if you can say, I live in your district and I really care about this. I'm going to do a quick review of state government because I think sometimes people have questions about how it all works. So real fast, what are the three branches of government?
Judiciary, executive, legislative.
So there's the judicial branch,
The
legislative branch, right? And
The executive.
Okay. So our Kansas government mirrors the federal government in a lot of ways. So at the executive level, who is our federal executive?
Laura Kelly.
No,
Oh,
federal.
Governor.
Donald Trump, right? President Trump.
Oh.
We're just gonna say that, and then we're not gonna talk anymore about that. Okay. So what's the legislative branch at the federal government level called? What do we call?
Congress.
Congress. Yeah. So Congress is the general term, right? But there's a Senate and there's a House.
Okay.
And we don't have to talk about them either. That's dysfunctional. And then what's the highest court in the land called?
Supreme Court.
Supreme Court. Okay.
Recipes.
Some of them are really awesome.
No, she
Okay, so those are the federal branches, right? And then at the state level, who's our top executive? I heard it.
Laura Kelly.
Laura Kelly, right? She's our new governor. She was just sworn in on Monday. So she's a Democrat. She used to serve in the Senate. She's from Topeka. She's been a long-time public servant. So she's our new executive. Then in the legislative branch in the state house, so we don't call ourselves Congress, we call ourselves the legislature. And there's the House of Representatives, so that's what I'm in, and there are 125 members of the House. And then there's a Senate with 40 members. So the Senate, there's 40 of them. They're elected to 4-year terms. They think they're smarter than us, but really, they're just not as much fun. The House has 125 members. We have these smaller districts that have about 25,000 people. And so it's based on population. So, in Johnson County, a House district could be a sliver of Overland Park, right, because of the population. But out west, a House district could be 7 counties to get to the 25,000 population. So they vary in size of geography, but they are all about 25,000 in population. The split right now between, what is it? I think it's 84 Republicans and 41 Democrats. I don't know the exact breakdown in the Senate, because we've had some switches. I don't know if you've seen that in the news lately, but some senators have moved over to our party, to the Democratic Party. I'm a Democrat. So I don't know their exact split. But in both cases, the Republicans have majorities in both the House and the Senate. Laura Kelly is a Democrat. And then what's our high court called in Kansas? Do we know? It's also the Supreme Court, right? But it's the Kansas Supreme Court.
That's true.
And so I can give an example of something you guys are definitely going to hear about this session, which is education funding, right? So it's been a big deal. Basically, as legislators, we have done a terrible job, and we haven't done our job over the past decade or so in terms of funding public schools. So last year, we had to backfill education funding by $525 million, and it still wasn't enough. So this session, we're probably going to have to add another $92 million into public schools to get us up to where we need to be adequately funding schools. And I can give you an example of kind of how this works. So the Kansas Constitution says schools need to be adequately and equitably funded. So adequate, what do you think that would mean? Like, if the language says it needs to be adequately funded, it needs to be, yeah, enough. Right? It has to be enough. So across the state, we need to be providing enough money, and it's called base state aid per pupil. So it's about, I think it's like at $4,300 to educate, so $4,300 a year to educate a kid in Kansas. And that's kind of an average. So that number, it has to be enough to pay the teachers, to keep the lights on, to buy supplies, all of that. And then the other part of the formula is that it has to be equitable. And so what do you think that would mean in terms of education? The funding is equitable.
That, like, it doesn't matter where the person lives in Kansas, it has to be the same.
Exactly. So it doesn't matter if you live in really wealthy Johnson County that can afford to put a lot of their local tax dollars toward education, or if you live in southwest Kansas in a community that's really struggling to fund their government, their local government, right? So that's the second part of the formula. So what happened over the past couple of years is that it's the legislature's job to provide the money for education. And so every year we're supposed to pass bills that fund education. And then it's up to the Board of Education to decide the curriculum. So the Board of Ed says, this is what we think every senior in high school needs to graduate with to understand. And the legislature says, okay, how much does that cost? we'll fund it. But what happened is that we didn't do our job funding public schools for almost the past decade, so the courts had to get involved, and there's been an active court case for, I think, like 8 years, that has basically sued the state of Kansas and the legislature to force us to pay more for public schools. So, we're almost super close, hopefully, to resolving that. But what has to happen is Laura Kelly is the Board of Education. Her budget that came out yesterday had $92 million for public schools, which is what the courts said you probably need to put in. So in June, the court said $92 million more a year is probably what you need. Her budget came out on Thursday with a recommendation for $92 million. But we have to convince all of these people, not all of them, a lot of them, right? Mostly to fund public schools. And I don't want to get into like a partisan thing, but for the most part, that's where the ideological breakdown is that some of the Republicans in the House, and you may have read this in the paper, actually just want to rewrite the Constitution and take the courts out of it and just say the courts have no business in determining school funding, which I think is a terrible idea, because then that would mean just the legislature is in charge of funding public schools, so that our schools would either get a lot of funding depending on who's in charge or none depending on who's in charge. So I, for one, think that it's not a bad idea to have the courts checking our homework and making sure we're doing the right thing. So that you'll hear a ton about that this session. That's probably going to be one of our really big issues, and I know since you all are in public schools right now, it's probably important to you all as well. So some of the other big things we're going to talk about are Medicaid expansion. You all heard any talk of that one? Mm-hmm. A little bit? Okay, so Medicaid is the state healthcare program for families and children, elderly people, people with disabilities. It's kind of the safety net that if you need some help, you or your family needs some help paying for your medical bills and paying and affording health insurance, Medicaid is that program that is provided at the federal level, and we have a state program. And 37 other states have actually expanded their program to bring more people in. Kansas hasn't yet. And so if we could expand Medicaid, we would provide health care to 150,000 more Kansans. So, and the federal government would pay for 90% of it. So it's been an active debate, and we haven't passed it yet, but it was also in Governor Kelly's budget to do Medicaid expansion. So again, to make something happen in the House and Senate, you need to get a simple majority, right? So we need just one more than half. So in the House, that's 63 votes out of 125, and in the Senate, it's 21, right? So you just have to get a simple majority to pass those, because the governor would probably, or she will support it. The other thing she talked about in her State of the State was our foster care system. If you've been hearing about some of the challenges in the foster care system, her new budget puts enough money to hire 55 new social workers for the state to improve our foster care system. So those are some of like the big issues that we're debating this session. And in terms of environmental policy, though, it's kind of a mixed bag. So Governor Kelly, I think she's fantastic. I supported her. I helped campaign for her. But she's not really an environmentalist. Like, it's pretty low on her priority list, I would say. Also because there are really big issues in the state, like a 10-year court case on public school funding, a foster care system that actually lost 70 kids last year, like just got lost from the system, right? So big problems that she has to deal with. So issues like environment, climate change, water, things like that, she didn't really campaign on, and so they haven't risen to the top of her big priorities. And also, I serve in the House, and last year, I think Representative Sloan came and talked to this class. He was the chair of the Water and Environment Committee. He retired, and since he left, and the current Republican House leadership doesn't really support environmental issues or solutions, they dissolved that committee. So there's no longer a Water and Environment Committee. I know. I joked in a forum and I was like, well, you know, because we got that covered. Like, because clearly there are no water and environment issues to worry about, so let's just get rid of the committee. So I'm pretty concerned because I don't know where those issues are going to go this session. There's still the Agricultural and Natural Resources Committee in the Senate. So the Senate can still probably pull some things under their natural resources umbrella in that committee. But I think water issues are gonna go to the agriculture committee that I serve on. And anyone wanna guess why it might be a challenging conversation in an agriculture committee to try to be talking about water policy, especially like water conservation? Anyone wanna try to guess? Yeah, so producers need a lot of water for irrigation, right? And that's a huge issue for farmers. So it kind of puts water in a committee that maybe has some folks that wouldn't be friendly to water conservation policies. So I'm excited about having a more balanced government in terms of having a Democratic executive branch and a Republican House and Senate, because before we had also a Republican governor, so there wasn't a lot of partisan balance. So I'm excited about that. I am a little concerned though this session about where those issues that we care about in terms of climate change and water and environmental issues are gonna end up. I have some ideas. And I'm trying to work, we actually have a new committee called Rural Revitalization, and it doesn't have a charge yet, like it doesn't have a list of bills it's gonna hear yet. So I've been talking to the chair about how important it is to focus on issues that help rural communities, like water policy, like energy efficiency, like local food production, things like that. So he's thus far been kind of open to it. But I think he's
Yeah,
sorry,
does
question? Yeah.
the like climate change issues also go to the agriculture?
Yeah, so any kind of climate change discussions would probably go to ag. But that's, that's problematic, right? In a lot of reasons, and for a lot of reasons. And, there are still, so I had this conversation just yesterday, I'll share with you. Doug Blex is a representative, he's a Republican, I think he's from South Central Kansas. He is a retired wildlife biologist, and he has a master's degree in natural resources, and we're buddies. We sit next to each other in the ag committee, and we were talking about how we're going to get water issues in front of this committee, how we're going to make sure that we continue funding the Kansas Water Plan that has a lot of really great programs in it. And I said, and Doug, we really, especially in the context of climate change, we absolutely need to be bringing this in front of this committee. And he goes, Eileen, I gotta stop you. You cannot say that word in this room. He's like, you cannot say climate change. And I can't believe that it's 2019 and we're still having this conversation. But that's kind of the reality of the Kansas State House, is that climate change is still, unfortunately, kind of a partisan issue where the Democrats are fine talking about it, campaigning on it. We had our first Chinese American candidate win in Johnson County this year, and he ran on a climate change platform in Johnson County and did really well. So it's becoming this like partisan divide and this urban-rural thing that if you live in an urban area, if you're Democrat, it's okay to talk about climate change, but some of the Republicans who serve out west, still there are deniers and there are people who don't want to listen to it. Yeah.
How are the committees, like what committees there are determined, or like?
Oh yeah, good question. So there's a Speaker of the House. His name's Ron Reichman. He's from Johnson County, and he has total control over committee assignments. So we fill out a little survey that says what we want to serve on, and then they decide. And usually it's kind of a seniority thing. So somebody who's been in the House or Senate for a long time kind of gets their pick of their favorite committees, and then somebody who's new like me gets told like, you're going to serve on this committee and you're going to like it. But yeah, so it's kind of decided that way. But if you all ever want to come to Topeka and shadow for a day, we have a PAGE program where you can come and shadow, or I'd be happy to just have you hang out for a day. You don't have to go through the formal PAGE program. You could just follow around for a day. And I think you would actually really find the committee meetings really fascinating, because it's 20 people, and they're split the way our House is split, 2/3 Republicans, 1/3 Democrat, and we all sit together, we're all mixed together. So it's not like it is on the House floor where the Republicans are on one side and the Democrats are on the other, and we're not talking to each other, right? But in committees, we're sitting next to each other, and the discussions are much more collaborative and collegial, and they're you can actually see some really cool policy making that's bipartisan. You can actually see that get done in a committee meeting. The stuff you see on the House floor is, I don't know, it's more like theater or something. And most people, by the time they get to the House floor, have decided how they're going to vote on something. And so people standing up and making speeches doesn't usually change people's minds. Sometimes it's just for their local news station or whatever. I feel like I'm sounding kind of cynical. I'm going to try to sound more uplifting if I'm really trying to recruit you guys. Anybody have questions so far about Kansas politics? Or?
Who sets like the agenda for what you talk about out like in those committee meetings?
Oh, good question. So each of the committees has between like 15 and 23 people probably on each committee, and there's a chair of the committee that is also appointed by the speaker. So the speaker picks out a chair. It's usually a long-standing, long-serving Republican. So all the committee chairs are Republicans because the speaker, and it's a Republican-controlled legislature. So all the committee chairs and vice chairs are Republicans. And so depending on kind of what the speaker wants to have happen, he or she will appoint a chair who agrees with them. So an example is our House Speaker does not want to see Medicaid expansion, and the committee that would come through would be Health. So he made sure to appoint the chair of that committee someone who is adamantly opposed to Medicaid expansion, because the committee chairs have a ton of power. They decide what bills come up and which ones don't. So that chair has basically said to us, we're not going to talk about Medicaid expansion, and she gets to decide. She gets to set that agenda. And so they are really, really powerful, and it's a thing that not a lot of people know, but that's how you work a bill through the system. Is it first goes to a committee, then if a committee votes it out, then it goes on to the full House floor for a vote, and then it has to get voted by the House and the Senate before it can even make it to the governor, right? So there's a lot of hurdles for it to go through, but the first one, and actually the hardest funnel to get through, is through that committee process. Fortunately, there are other ways to get a bill besides the committee. That's kind of the best way, is you want it to come through the committee, because if it can make it out of committee, then that means it has some good bipartisan support probably, and means it stands a chance on the floor. But there are other ways to do it. You can also, as an individual, like I could write a bill for Medicaid expansion, and I could turn it in, and it goes on a list of bills then, and then the speaker picks which of the bills get heard. So that strategy probably wouldn't work very well either, because I don't think a Medicaid expansion bill would get picked. But there are other ways to kind of move things through the process. So all hope is not lost. That was a great question. Do you have another? Yes.
How often are the committee chairs like changed? Or?
Oh yeah. So every 2 years they're changed in the House, because we're elected on it. So House members serve a 2-year term. So I was just reelected this past fall of 2018. I'll be up for reelection in fall of 2020. Senators have a 4-year term, so their committees turn over every 4 years or so. And so yeah, there's if you can't get your bill through in 1 year, you can hope that you get a different chair the next year, that the chair who was obstructing what you wanted to have happen, you could support their opponent in an election, right? Like that's how the process works. You can replace people if they're not representing what you want. Like if you see that I have a terrible voting record for something that you care about, then then you can help support my opponent, and that's kind of the reality of how it works. Yeah.
So like, what are the big like environmental issues that you've dealt with on your committee?
Unfortunately, we don't have a ton that I see coming this year. The big one last year you may have heard about was the Tyson chicken plant near Tonganoxie. Is everyone kind of familiar with that situation? So what happened is that the city of Tonganoxie, basically the governor came and they made a big announcement with all the economic development people in the Department of Commerce to say, Tonganoxie is going to get this amazing manufacturing facility. They did this big ribbon cutting, and then everyone's like, oh, by the way, it's Tyson chicken. And the citizens were not happy about it. And have you all talked about some of the challenges of large confined animal feeding operations? So what are some of the issues that come with really large, either chicken or feedlots or any of that? Eutrophication, yep. So the nitrogen and phosphorus runoff from their waste can cause issues in the Gulf and other bodies of water.
Ethical issues with like the treatment of the animals.
Yep, so ethical issues with the treatment of the animals. They're in very confined, pretty inhumane spaces. Anything else? There's a big labor issue and human equity issue there because the wages are pretty poor for some of these chicken processing facilities, and so usually communities get really excited about a new plant or company that brings good paying jobs, but not that excited about a plant that brings a lot of minimum wage jobs, right? In terms of helping people and helping families out of poverty. So there were a lot of issues. The city of Tonganoxie pushed back hard. It was pretty remarkable. There were I don't know if you guys saw them, but no Tyson and Tongi signs all over the area. And so they fought back and they said, we don't want this. We want jobs and we want economic development, but we don't want a massive chicken processing slaughterhouse in our community. And the surrounding counties also got pretty fired up because Tyson announced that they wanted to source all the chickens from within 50 miles. So we don't currently produce chickens in Douglas County or Johnson County or Leavenworth County. And so that would mean that a lot of our farmers would have to, or they would choose to raise chickens for Tyson. Which means that pollution would be spread out across farms in probably that Tri-County area. So it's not just the environmental issues of the plant itself and the waste coming off of a processing facility, but also just the impact of all those farms. So that was the biggest bill that we heard last year, was a bill that gets kind of wonky, but basically we had restricted the number of birds you could have as a Kansas farmer on your farm to 125,000. And actually, that's a lot of chickens, right? What this bill would do is it was going to lift those restrictions and make it 333,000, so that you could have 10 of those long, they look like kind of Quonset hut hoop house barns, right? That run the length of a football field. You could have 10 of those on your farm to produce 333,000 chickens a year. And that was a way to encourage, it was basically a bill that kind of waved the flag to the chicken industry that Kansas is open for business. So myself and several other representatives, when that bill came up on the floor, tried to pass amendments to change the bill. And so I tried to amend it back to the way it was. I tried to amend it back to the lower number. But my amendment didn't make it on. I didn't get 63 votes, and actually none of the amendments that tried to improve the bill passed. So that bill passed, and Governor Collier signed it, but we haven't had any chicken facilities locate here. So sometimes legislators think, if we just pass a law, we'll create all these jobs in whatever industry. And sometimes it's just because there are other reasons, right, that companies wouldn't locate here. So, I'm right after that bill passed, Tyson announced that they were moving their facility to Tennessee, I think. So for right now, that issue has kind of calmed down. But that was the big one last year. And yeah, I tried hard on it, but wasn't successful. But sometimes the environmental policies we take up are reactionary to something that's happening out in the state. We don't get a chance to set a lot of proactive policies on environmental issues. And I think that's just kind of the Kansas way, really, when it comes to environmental issues, is we're not like a California or a Massachusetts in terms of setting really proactive and often positive environmental policies, right? We're sometimes in a space of just reacting or trying to keep, bad things from happening.
Yeah, one of the issues Tom talked about is the sedimentation of our pond, of our reservoirs, which are not natural and a major source of water, and how they're filling up, and we're going to run out of that clean water source. Has anything happened with all of this work, or did that just go by the wayside?
Well, so Tom's committee provided a place to have hearings on those issues, but he worked really hard with Governor Brownback actually on a 50-year water plan. So the plan is there, and if we can, as a legislature, pass enough spending to support it, it requires $8 million a year, and even though Governor Brownback helped write the plan, he never signed anything to fund it. So we just got money into it last year, $4 million, and I'm hoping we can get closer to $8 million this year. So we actually have a really good plan to deal with the sedimentation of the reservoirs and the depletion of aquifers out west. And the water conversation in Kansas is tricky, right? Here we actually have abundant and plenty of water. It's more water quality issues that Northeast Kansas and the eastern part of the state are experiencing. And because of farm runoff and pollutants in water, whereas the western part of the state, it's all about water quantity, right? They actually just don't have enough, and they're depleting aquifers at a faster rate than they're being replenished. So we actually have a really good plan, but as you all know, like if you have a really great plan but you don't have any money to make it happen, it just kind of sits there. So that's my hope this year, is that we can convince the governor that in the grand scheme of things, $8 million isn't so much. In we have a $700 million state budget, so that's my hope. It's just a drop in the bucket. No pun intended. Yeah.
So I know that there are like a lot of problems with like voting places in Dodge City, and other places. Do you know if there's going to be like any reforms?
I hope. So there's an elections committee that has a pretty moderate chair, so I'm hopeful we'll get some good stuff through there. And what she's referencing is counties. The county clerks are in charge of elections in the state of Kansas, but then it's the Secretary of State for the whole state, and it used to be Chris Kobach, who set the policies that influence those counties and their county clerk decisions. So we have a new Secretary of State, his name's Scott Schwab, much more moderate. I don't think he will perpetuate a lot of the same things that Chris Kobach did. So that's good, and there's a lot of push for election reform, and it makes you look really bad as a politician if you vote against something that would help people vote, right? Like, so hopefully we can move some things this year, because there's really no reason to say, like, we want fewer polling places, you know, and so I'm hopeful that we can move some things this year. One of the things that, if I can kind of go off script for a second, one of the things that I notice about the State House and what I've been trying to really work on is we have a lot of people in that building who think really differently from each other, right? And one of the things I've noticed is that personal relationships, that if you build a true friendship with somebody across the aisle, then you can actually have a pretty good conversation about something. And so my first session, I went in thinking, I'm just going to convince them with facts, right? So I went around to all my Republican colleagues' offices with all my arguments laid out about why we needed to not increase the number of chicken farms and how detrimental that was for pollution. I got all these really nice smiles and thank you, and then a no vote. And so this year, I've really been trying to think about, you know, how do all of us make decisions in our lives, right? It's based on like personal experience and friendships, right? If your friend tells you something and you trust them and you believe them, it can really influence how you live and the decisions you make, right? So my strategy this year is, and it's not to be like sneaky or anything, like I actually think I'm just gonna hang out with people more and not be so like facty nerdy. So I'll let you know how that goes. But I think, you know, you see it in DC, right? And everyone is so tired of how fractured our political system is and how hateful people get. And I think one of the ways you combat that is actually, you know, making friends with someone who has a totally different reality than you. I mean, somebody who is a 5th generation Kansas farmer in Northwest Kansas, he and I have very little in common except that he loves maps and I love maps. So we collaborated on a map of election results. And, you know, what the news shows you is that there are these 7 blue counties that elected Laura Kelly and the rest is red. In reality, those red counties maybe want 55% Chris Kobach, 45% Laura Kelly. And the blue counties probably went 55% Laura Kelly, 45 Chris, right? So it's all a big shade of purple, right? And so he and I geeked out, made these maps together, talked about it, shared them with our colleagues. Right now, he and I have a thing. We love maps. We're probably not going to vote on a lot of things together, but like that's a foundational thing that you can be like, hey, you know, we can communicate about something and we can build a relationship on kind of a shared interest. And so I think that's, I don't know, if there's any like message I want to share, it's that I feel like I can sound kind of cynical even though I'm only 2 years in, but I really do think that if we can start to have more civility in our politics and treat each other with respect and say, I don't understand your reality. You farmed for, generations in dryland farming conditions in a town of 120. I have no idea what that's like, right? I grew up in Johnson County, I live in Lawrence, like I have this totally different worldview, but that's okay because we are both here in Topeka doing this public service because we care about our state. And like I feel like if we can find some common ground there, I feel like that's how we're gonna make change, and we don't have to go the way of DC where it gets so dysfunctional that you have to shut down the government. So, yeah.
Can you address kind of some women's issues?
Sure. Yeah.
I know you've done some great stuff recently.
Yeah, so I have young kids. I have a 4-year-old and I have a 15-month-old. I also have a 16-year-old stepson, and they're all boys. And so if you can picture the Venn diagram of what a 16-year-old, a 4-year-old, and like a 1-year-old like to do, it's really only eating. So like I'm just feeding boys all the time. But I started serving last year when Bowie, my youngest, was 3 months old. So I was coming off of maternity leave, going straight into the state house, and it's not a very friendly job for young people or young moms. And so if you look at pictures of the legislature, it skews primarily retired, primarily male, and primarily Caucasian. And for a long time, I think that was a reflective of the demographics of our state, but that's changing rapidly. And the people in Topeka don't look like the people in our cities and in the rest of the state. And I think the reason that is because we get paid $24,000 a year. So I know you guys probably don't know much about of salaries yet, but that's below the poverty line. So, and it's because of public service, right? Like we're getting paid a small salary to help us pay for meals and pay for lodging when we stay in Topeka and things like that. So it's not meant to make us rich, this job. But it also means that really the only people that can consider a $24,000 a year salary are retired or independently wealthy, right? So the legislature is made up of a lot of people who are retired from their job in the banking industry or their job with the utilities or retired from their farm. And so spending 5 months in Topeka is kind of fun, and it's kind of a way to make the winter go by fast. What it leaves out, I think, is people who are in the middle of their career or early in their career who maybe want to do public service, but look at that and say, I can't afford to pay my son's daycare bills to do that, right? I can't afford to save for them to go to college. And so that's one of the things I've really been wanting to work on and concerned about is how do we make this the kind of job that a young person would be interested in, and because I feel like we're missing really important voices. When you're having a public education debate and most of the people around the table, their kids are 30 years or older, right? They have no skin in the game about public schools, right? Their kids aren't in schools, they haven't been in schools for 20 years, right? So they're not worried about it. And I think we need to have people who are younger, who have their kids in school, people who are young, and have some on-the-ground experience being part of the debates. So, yeah, women are only 28% right now of the legislature. So we have a long way to go.
So is it possible that you could change the salary so that it's eligible?
All right, so here's where the politics get really messy. Imagine if I propose a bill that would increase my salary. Do you think I'll get reelected next time? Yeah, so the secret hope is that Laura Kelly could pass something in her budget in future years that could kind of incrementally get us there. Then none of the legislature has to vote on our own pay increase because that's really politically unpopular, right? It would get us all in trouble with our voters. And I'm hoping she could do something, but that's a hope. But yeah, I think that would make a huge difference.
That kind of made me think of the government shutdown deal where Congress still gets paid.
I know. Yeah. You know, it's interesting, because nobody wants to be like a Washington DC politician, we like do the absolute reverse, right? So last year we had a bill that would have improved the healthcare plan for state employees. And so because nobody wants to be seen as enriching themselves, we added an amendment that said that extension, that improvement doesn't apply to legislators. So I have like the grade D health insurance plan and state employees get a better plan because nobody wanted to vote for something that would be good for them as a legislator. Does that make sense? So we go the reverse because there's such an aversion to being like a Washington DC professional politician that we haven't had a pay increase in the legislature since 1982. We paid $88 a day, right? So that's like $11 an hour. And yeah, I know, nice face. Yeah, so so there's some systemic issues there that I really want to work on because I feel like for me and my family, I was able to make this choice because my husband is a chef at Limestone and we're part owners of that restaurant. And we also live really simply. We have a small house just a couple blocks away and have kind of decided to live really simply and, you know, have really old cars and a really old house. And my kids wear a lot of hand-me-downs and we've made that choice. But that's a really hard choice for a lot of people to make, right? When there are a lot of economic pressures. So for us, it's been okay, but we'll see. Yeah.
So, how does the shutdown impact like your role in the House and like Kansas State Legislature like overall?
So, good question. So a lot of the federal programs that are deemed essential are still moving, right? Where it's going to get tricky is the middle of February. There are a lot of federal grants and federal funding for things like WIC, which is the program for women, infants, and children that allows women to go to the grocery store and get fresh produce, bread, milk, like basics like grocery staples for free to feed if they have young children or if they're pregnant. That program, that funding runs out in the middle of February, and so we need to figure out if the federal government doesn't open in the next couple weeks, then as a state, we may start passing bills to fund those programs in the hopes of getting paid back later. But we may have to kind of put our agenda on hold here in the next month and start making sure that like federal highway grants that aren't coming through don't pause important projects, or the WIC program. There's also some grants for domestic violence shelters that come from the federal government that are being shut off during the shutdown. So we've just started having that because honestly, we all thought like, oh, this is like one of those bluff shutdowns. It'll be like a week or two, right? And then they'll figure it out. But it's going on like 5 weeks now, I think. So yeah, I think we're all trying to figure out what federal programs won't get funding. Yeah.
About how much communication do you have with like our federal representatives, like Steve Watkins or like Sharice Davids or?
You know, not much. More during campaign time, right? Because sometimes people group together and campaign together to help each other out. But whenever I've contacted them, they're very like, you know, collegial and such, but there's kind of like a stay in your lane thing, right? Where we deal with different levels of government. And it's actually funny, Jerry Stogsdill, who's a representative from Prairie Village, reached out to Moran's office and said, can you tell me how many federal workers live in my district in Prairie Village that are impacted by the shutdown? And the email he got back said, we actually don't keep records of this information, so we have no idea. So like they don't know how many of their constituents are impacted by the federal shutdown, and so
What?
I know, it's bizarre. I know. I'm with you. I was like, how do we not know? So yeah.
So if the shutdown does continue and you have to start taking on those like the WIC funding and things like that, is there the potential that like people who are against those programs could try and block that bill?
Absolutely.
So like those domestic violence centers, like if someone doesn't support that.
Absolutely, and that's terrible, right?
Yeah.
Because let's say there are a lot of people who don't want to fund government programs like food stamps or WIC or TANF, which is the temporary need for or temporary something for needy families, but it's money that families can get like if you're out of work. And so, some people ideologically won't support those programs, and so I think it'd be a terrible idea for us to try to have to debate that, because those have already been decided at the federal level. Also what that does is that distracts us and we have a debate about WIC when really we need to be working on school funding or more critical state issues. So I'm hoping they get things cleaned up, but I think that's kind of a big unknown for this session. The other thing you're gonna hear talked about, and I forgot to mention this, is there's a big push to return the tax windfall. Have you guys heard that term at all? Okay, so what happened is the federal government changed, it was a big deal last year, changed the tax law, right? And actually increased the standard deduction for families. What that basically means is that like an average middle income family is gonna get a bigger refund check from the federal government this year in a lot of cases, right? And the state and the federal government always align our policies. So if you, this is gonna get complicated. If you take that standard deduction at the federal level, then you have to take it at the state level, okay? So that's all good, except that Kansas didn't double our standard deduction like the federal government did. We didn't pass that same law at the same time. So what it means, and this is probably really wonky tax stuff since you guys don't pay taxes yet, but what it means is that some families are gonna get more money back from the federal government, but may actually owe Kansas more, and may overpay their taxes this year. We don't know yet, and the budget office can't tell us how much that's gonna be or how many families that's actually gonna impact. And we won't know until after the taxes are paid. So what the Democrats are saying is, let's get through tax season, because currently the IRS is also closed, right? So let's get through tax season, and then if we have to give refunds, we will. Whereas the Republicans are saying, let's return that tax windfall now before people pay it. We don't know how big it is. The estimates are that it could be $30 million or $100 million. And so we don't know, I mean, that's a pretty big gap, right? So we don't know how much to return. So there's gonna be a lot of debate about that. And what that could do is make the conversation about education, all those things that could also push that down the line because we're debating taxes. So, yeah.
So if the government like stays shut down after tax season, do you have to wait until it reopens to like remedy the overpayment?
Probably would, yeah. And also, a lot of people file their taxes automatically through the IRS, and then you just click a button that says submit my state return. Right? And that makes it really easy for us as a state, makes it really easy for individuals. So, God, I don't even know what, if it's still shut down in May, we probably have bigger problems. Yeah, because that would be critical. All right, sorry for the tax talk. I saw some of you guys kind of blinking heavily, so thanks for staying awake. So anybody have other questions or, yeah.
So I don't know if this is true or not, but someone was talking to me about how like when it's like the final weeks of the legislature that there's this thing called like gut and go or something where like there's a title of like a bill but then like they cut it out and then just like shove something in it and like so then it doesn't really get a hearing in committee. Is that true?
Yes. So here's the crazy, and no like business or school or organization would ever operate this way, but this is how it works. It's nuts. But let's say you have a bill on transportation. It passes out of the transportation committee. It's to name a highway, the Mrs. Lisa Ball like freeway, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's a simple bill, no big deal. Like it passes, gets 123 votes, 125 votes in the House, 40 in the Senate. It passes. Well, let's say it passed out of the House and it's sitting over in the Senate chamber, waiting for them to vote on. They can, at the end of the session, take the contents of that bill about the freeway, take it out, and keep the bill number, because we voted on the bill number. So let's say we call it Senate Bill 40. They could take that out and make it a bill about abortion or about climate change or about like any topic, taxes, whatever. And since we already voted on Senate Bill 40, then it only has to get voted on by the Senate, right? So it's a tricky move. It's awful if you're a legislator too, because let's say I sponsored that bill and I was like really proud to sponsor the Lisa Ball Freeway naming bill, and now all of a sudden my name is on a bill about giving millionaires more tax refunds or something I wouldn't be supportive of. Then my name is still attached to that bill. So it's awful all around, and it's a sneaky move that lawmakers do at the end of the session, but you have to be the party in power basically to pull that off. So there's a big push last year to get rid of that.
Yeah.
And here's the awful thing, is that you would think, like, the Democrats would be like, yes, more transparency, but the Democrats want to hold on to that because in case they're ever in power again, they want to be able to use that trick.
When was
It's
the
so
last time that
awful. I know, when was the last time that happened? Good question. But yeah, so like even when you think, you know, I was like, guys, we have to get rid of this. This is insane. And there are still some members of my own party who are like, well, if we ever get in power again, we may want to use that. So, yeah, it's ridiculous.
What's the best way if they were interested in contacting
Oh,
you
yeah.
for shadowing or?
Sure, I'll just put my email up here.
I want to give you, she has a former APES student babysitting her child right now, so I don't want to make her late.
Thank you. So here's my email. It's eileen.horn@house.ks.gov. There's on the kslegislature.org website, there's a link to sign up for the PAGE program, and it tells you all about it. But basically, you come to Topeka for a day, you shadow lawmakers, you get to sit on the floor, like not up in the gallery watching, but you actually get to sit on the floor. We have a snack bar, and you get a $5 voucher for the snack bar. That seems to be really popular. And then you can kind of just see the process for a day. You can sit in on committee meetings and stuff. So all you need to be able to do is get reliable transportation up to Topeka and contact me so I can get you